Hello, and welcome to Revolutionize Your Relationship. I am your host, Eva Blake, and in this series, I'm talking to a variety of experts who are uniquely qualified to educate and empower you to master your mind and body intimacy, to unleash your passion, and to create everything that you desire in life and in love, because you are absolutely worth it. So I'm really excited to introduce you today to Geoff Laughton. Geoff is your relationship architect. Geoff is devoted to supporting you to design and build the relationship that you desire that expands connection, healing, and harmony. He's worked with hundreds of private clients over the years, led 300 workshops, facilitated a wide variety of retreats for men and women around the world. And he's the author of Built to Last, Designing and Maintaining a Passionate, Loving, and Lasting Relationship. So welcome, Geoff.
Thank you. Good to be here. I appreciate you inviting me, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you. So, one of the things that I really loved about your style when I first came to your website was this idea about purchasing furniture, like figuring out how you want to build the house of your relationship. So I'd love for you to start with this idea of how do we design a relationship that works for us, especially if we've already been in the same relationship and we're like, okay, something has changed and now we got to change. How do we design when we're already in it?
Okay. Well, the first thing is do not shop at IKEA. So let me answer that first if you're new to relationship, and then I'll augment a little bit about how that comes in handy when you've already been in one for a while. So what I mean by consciously designing a relationship before you go into one is first, you have to know what you want. And before you hit the record button, you were mentioning like a lot of people go up the escalator to the relationship department and, oh, that piece looks good, I'll pick that one. And, that's unfortunately not a joke. That kind of seems to be how a lot of people I've worked with over the years get into relationship. I'm attracted, we have good sex, we enjoy being together, we must be a good match.
Mm-hmm.
And what I encourage single people to do, if you're in between engagements, is to identify first what kind of relationship are you looking for.
Yeah.
So there are three fundamental types of relationship that I like to talk about. One is a careful relationship. Are you looking for a relationship where both you and your partner are going to work really, really hard to never upset each other, never have any conflict, and you're going to walk on eggshells for the rest of the relationship's life? That's a careful relationship. Or there's a carefree relationship. And a carefree relationship is one where you just want to have fun. I'm old enough that I could cite girls just want to have fun, but that probably would go over the heads of half the people listening. But, that might be the man or woman who says, I just really want to have fun. I want to just keep it light. Let's just enjoy ourselves. Why do we have to talk about any of that, serious stuff? So carefree.
Yeah.
Then there's a caring relationship. And the way that this was defined, these three types were developed by John DeMartini originally. And the way that caring relationship was defined by him, and I've used it ever since, is the kind of relationship that is intentionally chosen to be a vehicle to allow both people in the relationship to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes one of the core values and foundational pillars that we love each other. I mean, there does need to be love and all that, but you have to, people that are in that kind of relationship, they're not afraid of conflict. They're not afraid of, rubbing against the grain with each other. And when that happens, they recognize it as a pathway to deepen themselves, which will then deepen your intimacy of all kinds. And that when, the shit hits the fan, which it invariably does, that you don't freak out. You kind of put your big boy, big girl pants on and go, okay, how do we use this not to validate all our fears around intimacy and being in relationship, but to go deeper?
Yeah.
So you really, all of us have elements of all three. But in my experience, we tend to gravitate towards one of the three primarily.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, in between or in the very beginning of dating or whatnot, you should be talking about that. Consciously designing means you're like you would if you were building a house. You have to look at, all right, where are we going to build it? Where do we want to live? Then what kind of house do we want? So you design the house. We want one that's a little teeny tiny house because we're never going to have children. And, we don't think we're ever going to have to worry about 4 people sharing a 5 square foot bathroom. Or you might want a really, really big house because you want a lot of kids, etc. And then once you know what you want the house to look like, and you kind of have a good idea of how you want to furnish it and what you want it to feel like when you're in it, then you get to build it. Mm-hmm. Now, you can't always obviously design it to the letter for someone you haven't met yet.
Yeah.
But you do, because it's your house, it's your relationship house waiting to come into fruition. You got to know what you want.
Yeah.
And then you want to be talking to your prospective partner to share, well, what does he or she want? What's their vision? What's their house look like? Then that gives you both the opportunity before you get fully and completely invested in each other to find out, do we have a sense that we have a level of compatibility? Mm-hmm. And the third part of that design process includes looking at what are your values. I'm really, I'm shocked at how many people, by the time they come to me for help with their relationship, one of the first things I ask them is, well, what values do you have in common? Mm. And the vast majority of people, and I've been doing this for 26 years, in that entire time, the majority of people go, I don't know. We never talked about that. Yeah. Like not even talking about, well, I think a lot of people talk about, do they want children? But they don't talk about, well, are you a rural person or are you an urban person? Are you a religious person or not? Spiritual or not? How do you relate to family? Do you want to be living near your family of origin? No. Or or do we like independence? And how much freedom, quote unquote, do you really need to be pursuing your own goals as well as your collective goals? Yeah. So things like that, really getting down what are just your fundamental life values.
Yeah, yeah.
And you should be talking about, well, what are your relationship values? Yeah. Because ideally there's some overlap, but relationship values are pretty distinct. Mm-hmm. And then I'll say lastly, for the design part, it's getting an idea of how do you each, like I tell people, when you've gone on enough dates with somebody that you decide, I think I really want to get to know this person. They might be the one. At that point that you realize that, you really need to be asking, so how do you relate to conflict?
Yeah.
You're not going to run into many people that are going to go, oh man, I love it. I eat it for breakfast. Bring it on. You're not going to get that. But if they kind of blanch and evade the question, and they don't want, like, they just don't want to go there, that's not necessarily a fatal, no, you're not the one. But it's definitely a red flag that you want to go deeper. And if you hear that and you're going, oh, they don't want to talk about it. Good. That means I don't have to talk about it. Then you're both host. So
Yeah.
not a good thing.
Absolutely. I love what you're saying. Like, this piece around what are your values, right? Or how do you want to build your house together? Partly what I hear you saying, and these are the words that I would use, is like, what is your vision for the future? And then what is it like for you to be you right now? Because as you were talking about, like, how much independence do you want to, like, do your own thing? I immediately thought of how much time do I want to spend with my beloved? Like, what kind of connection do I want to have with them? I was having another conversation, and the other person was saying, I really like to have text messages during the day, like I like this kind of ongoing back and forth interaction during the day. It's like, if I didn't recognize that, I would be upset. Part of what we get to look at to create a good relationship is not only what do I want in the future, but what is it like for me to be me right now? And then, because that's going to tell me a lot about how I'm going to be with somebody else in the relationship.
Right.
So I'm curious, like, what does it look like? How do you design when you've been in a relationship? And part of this is your story. You were in relationship for a number of years, and then you realize, like, okay, this has gone off the rails, and now I need to go in a different direction, right? So how do you design from that place when you realize, like, wow, I'm not really alive right now in my life, or I'm not happy, or I'm not really in relationship with my partner the way that I thought I would be at this point? How do I design from this place where I want to get out of where I'm at, and I want to get to where I want to go?
Right. So you kind of point to part of the answer in how you phrase the question. I want to clarify in this little answer part of it. The relationship that went off the rails was not the one with my wife.
Mm.
It was the one with me.
Yeah, beautiful.
And
Let's go
my
there.
wife and I have been together for 39 years. And while our relationship has had its share of struggles, the biggest thing that I had to learn was that my vision of what a great marriage should look like, which for me, and I think subconsciously for a lot of people, to some degree or another, would be written out as the exact opposite of my mom and dad's relationship. And that's not a great start. But, when my wife and I got together, I was 24. How much do you really know when you're 24? So
Not much. I didn't know much at all.
Yeah, me neither. And so I think that you have to really understand that the fate of your relationship lies most heavily with your relationship to yourself, your level of emotional intelligence, your level of emotional resiliency, because the majority of people in my experience tend to pick the person that is going to give their inner children what they never got when they were growing up.
Yeah. So talk about emotional resiliency, right? Because those words are really, really powerful, but let's just define what that means. Because like in relationship also to emotional intelligence.
Right. So emotional resiliency means that if you come home from work and you're really excited to see your partner and you walk through the door and you're going, hey, and they're looking at you like you're bad fish, that you don't suddenly crumble in the moment, that you have a strong enough sense of self and self sufficiency emotionally, that you have an internal locus of control for your state, so that whatever happens externally, it might rock you a little bit, but it doesn't throw you off into a codependent panic attack.
Yeah.
So to make that shorter, emotional resiliency really means that you can be comfortable in your own skin and roll with the flow without having to be dependent on what's happening out there, and particularly with your partner or with your children for that matter.
I love the word resilient. I always think of a buoy in the water. It's got some kind of give. It does move, but like it doesn't go out with the tide, right? Like it's anchored in its place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so why that's particularly important in redesigning, my wife, I've never ever, really not ever, have I thought about leaving this marriage. Ever. And
congratulations.
My wife hasn't. But because we went through some pretty hard times about 20 years ago, and then again 10 years ago. Because when you have children, your children can have a massive impact on your relationship.
Right.
So I never wanted to leave, but what I got to figure out that I didn't know in my 20s and really at least half of my 30s is that beautiful, euphoric, and kind of bunny stage, because you hump like bunnies in that first 8 or 9 months. All of that, biological, hormonal, that is awesome.
Yeah.
And it fades.
Yeah.
Naturally. It's not a problem that it fades. But I really thought that if I found the right woman and we were really great together, that we would just be that way till death do us part.
Mm-hmm.
So almost 40 years later, we probably have had to reinvent our relationship 2 or 3 times because we change. So I encourage couples who have been together for a while, so I'm going to say 10 years or more, that if you've been together that long, about every 5 to 7 years, you should really consciously let's take a fresh look at how the design is working for us. Because if you buy a house and you're pretty happy with it, and you've lived in it for 15, 20 years, you better be getting new carpeting, repainting,
totally.
and you might be redecorating. But we don't always think to do that with our marriages.
Right.
So I think it's a really valuable thing to look at that newly periodically, or it might be sooner if you hit a really, really big pothole, like you become, roommates and your sex life is non-existent. All of that isn't necessarily an automatic indicator that your marriage failed. It's more an indicator that you need to go back to the drawing board and see what's the next iteration that might get you both re-inspired, re-enrolled, recommitted, and reinvigorated to create together.
Yeah. I think the piece that you just said about, just because something has shifted or something's not working doesn't mean that it's a total failure. Doesn't mean that you have to throw in the towel. It doesn't mean anything about your personhood. It doesn't mean that you're a bad partner, a bad lover, a bad man, woman, any kind of person, right? And I think one of the things that I hear a lot when people come to me, whether they're part of a partnership or they're single, is like, oh, it's not working or it didn't work. And so therefore I'm bad. I'm a bad partner. I'm a bad person. Right. And so people really internalize it and really eat up the shame and the guilt and the frustration. And it's like, sometimes I just want to be like, please stop doing this. This is what's not working. Right. And so I really love part of your approach, which is so simplistic and it's almost it's almost objective in some ways. It's just like, how can we look at the design of how we've structured our life in the same way? Like when I go into the kitchen, is the plug really where I need it to plug in the coffee machine?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes it goes, like it goes back to The Odd Couple. If you remember that show or movie, one of you's a slob and the other one's a neatnik.
Yeah.
You want to know some of that stuff before you get too far in.
Yeah.
And you just reminded me of another very, very important piece of the design process that speaks to what you were just sharing. And that is, you really want to make sure before you go all the way in that you spend at least 2 or 3 times with your prospective partner, if you're going into a new thing, and their family. Watch how they behave with their family, particularly their parents, if they're still alive.
Yeah, great.
Because how they are with their family is how they're going to be with you.
Yeah. Right. Because we're so much of us, we're repeating so much, like what you said earlier, like I choose a partner who's going to give me what I didn't get when I was a child. Either it's to fill the void or to repeat, to create more duplicates. Right. So I love that piece. So what happens if I go and visit my partner's family and I'm like, yikes, what is this?
Well, there's a very technical term for the appropriate response to that.
Yeah, bring it.
Run! I'm being a little sarcastic, but I think when that happens, it actually creates an amazing opportunity because you get to point out to that person, I notice, I saw some parallels about how you and I have been operating with each other, even in the dating. And I noticed your mom and dad doing the same thing. And I'm wondering if you see that. Are you aware of that? Because a lot of times people, who the hell wants to admit, oh yeah, I do my mom when I get mad?
Right.
So you put it up on the table. You just, okay, here's what it is. And if that person is willing to really engage and go, oh, wow, then they're probably going to be more suited for that caring type of relationship. And if that's what you're looking for, that's good, step 1. And then step 2 is go into more of it and find out how eager are they to be their own person. Are they willing to actively face and break through those patterns and discover more of who they are?
So much of what I hear you say is around consciousness. Am I willing to be conscious of myself? Am I willing to be conscious of where I came from in the past? Am I willing to be conscious of my vision going forward? Am I willing to be conscious of literally, am I being my parent right now? I'd love to just shift gears slightly, but maybe it's not much of a shift, which is, you have a book called Building a Conflict-Proof Relationship. And as you were saying, I'm going to go to your parents, visit you with your parents, and then tell you that you're being like your dad. Now that sounds like that could generate some conflict. So how do you how do you create a conflict-proof relationship in this context when you're, as you've been talking, it's like a prospective partner and before you go all in, right? You're really in this exploration stage.
Well, and by the way, it works for long-term relationships because as we change, the
Yeah.
different ways that we might approach conflict or work through conflict I'm definitely better at it in my 60s than I was in my 20s.
Absolutely.
But let me speak, to your question a bit more generally. So the first thing that is required to get a conflict-proof relationship is for you to develop, in case you don't already have it, but develop more of that emotional resilience internally, which really happens. And for parents, this is true for how you raise your children. You've got to fall down and go boom and get your ass back up. Male or female, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You have got to go through hard things. That is how you build emotional resilience. You can't read a book, memorize the 10 ways, and think it and have it.
Yeah.
You got to go through pain. You have to go through loss. You have to go through struggling and going for something and failing and get up and do it again. We're recording this shortly after the Olympics.
Yeah.
You think all those Olympic athletes got there without a ton of failure and all that? So if you build that up, then you're going to reach step one of a conflict-proof relationship, which is that you don't freak the F out when conflict shows up.
Yeah.
So many people, and I get it. I grew up with parents who yelled at each other. And when you're a kid and people are pissed off all the time, that is frightening to a child. And so, our young parts inside go, whoa, I don't want any of that. So you have to kind of be an adult and go, okay, conflict is not a problem. The problem with my parents or the problem with my past 3 spouses before I got into the same argument with spouse number 4 wasn't conflict itself. It's how I relate to it, and it's how I manage it when it's happening. So you've got to accept that conflict is essential. Step 2 is you really, when you're not in conflict with your partner, is to talk about, well, what was conflict like in your family growing up? And then sharing what it was like in your family. And anytime you see your partner either turn white or, note, okay, and find out how each other has dealt with conflict in past relationships. And odds are pretty high that you'll find out that there are similarities with each of you to how your parents managed conflict.
Sure. Yeah.
So that gives you, a head start at being able to go, oh, so then you could ask a third question when you learn that much. Well, how's that been working for you so far in your life?
Yeah.
And from there, when you hear, not so good, well, how would we like to do it?
Yeah.
And if you don't know, then buy that book.
Yeah. Now we're getting into the, like, where have I been? Okay, now where do we want to go? And it's like the question of how do we want to do it together, or how do you want to do conflict with me is so much. It's co-creation, it's opportunity, it's a new moment, a new possibility, rather than, like the relationship escalator. Well, we're going to date and then we're going to talk to family and then we're going to get married and then we're going to have kids. And it's just like, instead of being on autopilot, it really is like, what what are we creating here in this space together? It's
Right.
so valuable, especially with, I think, conflict in particular, because a lot of people do want to avoid, or a lot of people think that conflict means that something as bad is happening, like bad, be afraid, be ashamed, like
Right.
impending doom, the house is falling in on us, the sky is falling, that whole thing. Whereas conflict, like it's going to show up, but it really is, like you said, how you relate to it that makes all the difference in the world.
You have to be willing and able to take 100% responsibility for your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you say hi honey and your partner hits you in the face, well, that is on them.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, where you go with that is 100% up to you. So it means you have to be willing to let go of I think it's probably largely an American thing of, you did this to me, you're making me feel, blaming the other without taking any responsibility for your part. The second thing on top of that is you have to have rules of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
You have to determine when you're not angry or activated by your partner. You've got to really look at what are our agreements that we're going to make. That is, we can be heated, but if we get too heated, then how do we deal? And what is not okay? Now, does that mean you're going to be perfect? No. But if you both come up with agreements like that, and you both commit to it, and then either of you break that commitment, then if you're going to be successful, you own that you broke it, and I'm going to recommit, and I'm going to go cool off, and I'm going to go handle my stuff. Because make no mistake, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, when we get really pissed off, it's all about us.
Yeah.
I hate that, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get triggered, and, our amygdala in the back of our brain has us running from the T-Rex. You got to go and get away from your, time out,
Mm-hmm.
go move your energy, yell, scream, walk around the block, do whatever you got to do. And when you have more bandwidth and you're back in here, then you can talk about what happened, and you can take ownership for your part of the triggering. And then you can talk about, well, how could we try and have that not keep happening?
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I love what you said about commitment around like ground rules or rules of engagement. And one of the big changes that I made in my life in conflict was saying to myself, and sometimes even saying in the moment of the conflict that we're in, I love you so much. I care about you so much. I really want to understand you. Like, even if that was just for me to convince myself or to re-enroll, right? It's just like, remember that this is what I'm here for, to bring that temperature down, right? Because before that, I was a door slamming, stick my flag in the ground. Like, why aren't you doing things the way that I want you to do them? That doesn't work in relationship. So I love this, like when we make a commitment together, we stick to it. Right. And then we get to remind each other of the commitments that we've made. Right. And how beautiful that is, because now we're not arguing about the toothpaste. We're not arguing about the lawn being mowed. We're not arguing about what's in the refrigerator. We're actually getting deeper than that. Beautiful. Yep. So Geoff, thank you so much for participating. You have brought beautiful wisdom and some good laughs into this space. And I am absolutely grateful. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome, Eva. Thank you again for inviting me.
And to everyone else who is watching, again, come back tomorrow for another juicy, wonderful conversation.